Okay, our final panelist is Chloe Faux from Columbia University, Department of Anthropology.
Okay, so I'm Chloe. So I guess my research concerns infrastructure of the body and hierarchies of mobility. And I'm thinking a lot about, I guess, my subject position as someone who's kind of like made the itinerary from comparative literature to anthropology as this Sierra Leonean South African subject on this side of the division of labor, working in, I guess, South Africa now, where the native kind of resides as this figure of the anthropological imagination. So I guess that's kind of one of the questions framing my work. 1. I'd been scratching my locks off in wonder at the I Love Soweto stickers my people covered their arses with, asking myself, how can one express positive emotion for a slave labor camp? In 2014, an image of Nomatemba Hlongane with her pants down went viral in South Africa, and news outlets took advantage of the readily available wordplay. Desperate women's naked outcry, what a bummer, toilet protests, strips in peak hour traffic. Some spoke of national shame, that in this Rainbow Nation day and age, people are still shitting in buckets. Others spoke of the shameful behavior of Hlongane. How seriously can this kind of behavior be taken? An internet spectator commenter asked. It started on a cool June morning before dawn at the Diploof hostel in Johannesburg, Soweto Township. Hlongane, a resident of the hostel, and some of her women neighbors took their buckets of uncollected shit and piss and dumped them on the street in protest. They were pissed off. They had voted for a local council member who vowed things would change. They would no longer have to shit in buckets. They would have trash cans, running water, and electricity. But their bucket toilets had not been emptied in 3 months. No infrastructure as structure of life. They blocked the busy Chris Honey Road with burning tires. Shortly thereafter, police officers sprayed the women with tear gas. In defiance, she dropped her pants for the officers during rush hour traffic for all the Kumbi drivers, passengers, motorists to see on their morning commutes. Because, I quote, I wanted people to see that I no longer had a toilet, and I was going to start using the road as a toilet, she said in an interview with Drum, which is a magazine. She then shook her ass. She, I quote, danced and jiggled her buttocks, as one report states, to protest songs. Egged on by a growing crowd, she also flashed her crotch. Taxi drivers and motorists were advised to take a detour because the area was, quote unquote, tense, unsafe, however, under control. Kengiwe Dlamini, Hlongane's neighbor, also bet her ass, squatting as though she were taking a shit. I quote, we wanted to poop on the road so the government could see that we don't have toilets. If I was pressed, I would really have pooped here, she said in an interview with the Star. As the newspaper reported, for her part, Hlongane doesn't see what the fuss is about. She and her fellow protesters are naked already, she says, because they have to share toilets with men, women, and children. By dropping her pants, she was not only further enacting a nakedness, which for Jacques Derrida is unimpeachably near what they call the animal. There's another image available for our viewing displeasure, in which she's supine, corpse-like on the ground, unconscious, in front of the hostel. She was eventually revived, reports say, a bucket of water dumped on her head, a cup of water to drink. Just before the police started firing rubber bullets, but she remained on the ground. In the image, she lies in the foreground, and behind her, another resident, perhaps the one who had just revived her, is captured mid-stride, running away to the margins of the frame, the interface of self-preservation and rescue in the face of antagonism. For Fred Moten, coalition emerges out of your recognition that if it's fucked up for you in the same way that we've already recognized it's fucked up for us. Bullets refuse coalition between lives made refuse, and foregrounded is the double bind of what Krista Thompson calls emblazoned invisibility, being seen as an act in the course of which it can happen that a subject escapes our attention, and instead we focus on the theatrics of it all. That the stench from buckets full of shit never knocked Hlongane out, but tear gas did. Insurgency and then unconsciousness, the failure of agency or its impossibility. What forms of insurgence can emerge from structures of shame? Sarah Ahmed, to be witnessed in one's failure is to be ashamed, to have one's shame witnessed is even more shaming. The bind of shame is that it is intensified by being seen as others as shame. It is both troubling and disruptive to revel in what Spillers calls the monstrosity of the flesh, but can one really ever embrace pornotroping, which is to say, the enactment of black suffering for a shocked and titillated audience? Soye Megase, the local councillor, later made an entrance and recited the lines. This problem with the toilets is a genuine one. I'd informed the department and I thought they had been emptied. I later found out that the contractor claims that he had not been paid, and that's why he did not empty them. I will be meeting with the residents and the political leadership later today. 2. In the beginning was excrement. Since then, it's all been constipated. We await the second coming of King Purgative. Biko wasn't a victim of his thinking. He was a murder victim. But his brutal murder, as much as his thinking, animates our political imagination in the now. And perhaps this now is a space of deferral. Detained and interrogated in the name of the Terrorism Act, Biko was beaten, punched, thrown into a wall, and changed in a crucifixion position to a security gate and left to die by security police. Brain damage, it was said, killed the conjurer of black consciousness. What if we positioned Biko, the thinker, as a figure of haunting, whose death rhymes with the condition of blackness? How do we attend to the humiliation and exposure that makes the present intolerable? Here and everywhere, the physical indexes the political appeal, and black people respond to blocked bare survival with, I can't breathe because the police are collectively choking us. I can't drink because our water is contaminated. I can't eat because there's nothing to eat. I can't shit because our buckets have not been emptied in months. We don't have toilets. The ones you gave us don't have doors. Our girls are being raped and winding up dead in toilets. And indeed, the language of analysis comes second, after the poetics of the flesh, which attest to the fundamental palpability of the sign. Black bodies at the mercy of those who had, in the words of Biko, a monopoly on comfort and security. Biko's death seems to index what Christina Sharp calls a blackened knowledge, an unscientific method of observing that where one stands is relative to the door of no return, and that moments of historical, ongoing rupture. The violent that ruptures orifices, expelling blood, brains, vomit, shit. Apartheid was enforced through a series of acts, where the word act simultaneously signified concrete activity, performance, and legislation. Race Classification Act, the Group Areas Act, Native Laws Amendment Act, Bantu Education Act, Black Homeland Citizenship Act, the Terrorism Act. The black body was deemed defective and disgusting, and this disgust involved not just corporeal intensities, but speech acts. As survival mechanisms, terror and disgust prevent the taking in of what might contaminate us, but the very project of survival requires that we take something other into our bodies. Survival makes us vulnerable in that it requires we let in what is not us. To survive, we open ourselves up, and we keep the orifices of the body open. Bare survival is taking in oxygen, water, food, but bare survival is also the expulsion of CO2, piss, shit. How do we get at the concrete truths that make life for many black people in South Africa barely livable? Truths that will not, cannot enter the archival record, and instead think about another archive of a bodily consciousness, raced black, that is not necessarily commensurate with political memorialization. Truth is a loaded device/concept when reconciliation seems untenable in the face of obfuscation and antagonism, when much of what happened then continues to happen now, and neoliberalism colors the rainbow nation. What if we want truth, but not necessarily reconciliation, because reconciliation was never meant for us anyway, because reconciliation has been swallowed by liberalism, which blocks the articulation of black suffering. 3. Death is expensive, but then so is life and love, which causes both. Sometimes I can't afford any of them, showdown ghost time. MLK has been gone a while, and it's still no time to be holding hands and singing. I give out my gun day prayer, full metal jacketed, all friends, zero enemies, yet the ruling emotion is hate. I'm going to let you just read this one for time's sake. Where one relieves oneself is a contentious subject in South Africa because during apartheid, many black people in townships pissed and shot in buckets. Bucket toilets have since been declared a human rights violation by South Africa's Human Rights Coalition, and yet their usage remains widespread. A quote, a persistent problem in 7 of the 9 provinces despite measures to eradicate it, which is from Stats SA, which is the Statistics Bureau. Having only buckets in which to piss and shit is colloquially and officially known as the bucket system. To call a last-ditch solution, or more precisely, the solution just ahead of shitting in a ditch, a system, is revealing of a politics of disavowal, of systematic contingency to which black people are most often victim. Non-system as system, infrastructure feeling that props up the everyday, on the fungible grounds of indignity, the constitutional right to dignity, the unstable division between necessity and desire, and also the shaky grounds of improvisation and protest. Moments of formalized informality that force the system to buckle, producing a set of reversals whereby its victims become its aggressors. Necessary expenditure becomes excess as though, as Bataille says so well, an exaggerated increase in the number of the living threatens to diminish the individual share. Bucket toilets can be used in a dialogue of claims and counterclaims to status and analogies for expressing a general view of the social order. As perma-temporary solutions to an enduring problem of how to get rid of shit, bucket toilets point to what Tess Lee calls a dirty literalism that indexes the concrete and particular rather than the imminent. What emerges is what Lesego Rampuloquin calls a sewer-bound poetics that allows us to attend to the humiliation, fear, and exposure that undergirds the affective and bodily infrastructure of black life in South Africa. Literalism simultaneously sustains and disfigures brutality. Curdled is the language of agency and resistance, and curdled too is the repertoire of protest in the protest capital of the world. Instead, an all too familiar call and response to burning tires and tear gas, rocks and bullets takes place. Here once more, we don't ask the question, can the subaltern speak? For the non-reciprocal dialogue, quote unquote, of white supremacy, which traffics in the language of legalese and or rubrics of public safety and social pathogenesis, makes it clear that she cannot. My generation break beaten into line, obscenity heritage. In 2007, Cape Town's Democratic Alliance, the opposition party, installed 1,316 one-to-one white porcelain toilets, which is to say 1 toilet for 1 household, in the Silvertown housing project in Kaicha, one of the mostly black townships. They were all lose with view, which is to say a toilet comprising of a concrete base plate, operational toilet, but without roofs or walls. The residents of Kaicha would have to shit in public if they could not afford to enclose them, and 55 toilets in the Makaza area, one of Kaicha's informal settlements, remained open. People spoke and wrote about it in press statements, in forensic reports, in newspaper articles. The ANC, so African National Congress Youth League, informed the Human Rights Commission. The South Africa's Social Justice Coalition declared the residents were left, and I quote, deprived of their rights to health, safety, and dignity. Then Mayor Dan Plato retorted, we were never approached by the residents asking for assistance to cover their toilets. Tires were burned, rocks were thrown. Protesters were called rude hooligans and thugs by the mayor, unable to reason properly. Government officials were denounced by the residents as all talk, no action. Eventually, the Office of the City Manager Forensic Services Department compiled a 17-page document entitled Forensic Report into Alleged Irregular Construction of Toilets in Silvertown Housing Project. It is a document that bears what Primo Levi calls the frightening anesthetic power of company papers, where something like life unfolds in an ungendered, unraced universe. Instead, involved parties are referred to as political office bearers, council employees, and the community. It is the sort of document that bespeaks an endless surveying as reflex policy response, that allows some to traffic in doublespeak and renders the voices of others as complaints. Toilets as material objects transposed to digits on a budget and words on a page, and all of these forms as numbers, as a series of letters, turn toilets themselves into documents. And so this is an idea from Brian Larkin on the politics and poetics of infrastructure. The side of policy, the side of responsibility, diverts the culpability towards the community. Okay, oops. Sorry. Kaiichi means new home, but their shit is always breaking down, and the breakdowns are attributed to lack of attention, and expectations become extravagance, where failure and denial of service delivery is attributed to a culture of non-payment. In turn, poverty and vulnerability become inextricably linked analytical categories through which Black life is read. The lose with a view emerge as material non sequiturs, the penetrative effect of discourse in things, figures that produce an aesthetic and response with material consequences. The purported functions of health, safety, and dignity are illusory, but even if the toilets are not attached to doors, they are attached to techniques of regulation, audit, and administration, of consent coercion, of rescue deception, of ANC-DA rivalry, of presence-absence of the state. On April 29, 2011, Judge Nathan Erasmus of the Western Cape High Court ruled that the city exhibited a, quote, failure to recognize the basic human rights of the community. The city was ordered to enclose all of the toilets of the entire Silverton project. Many of the toilets, however, were without taps and or sewage connections. In October 2012, residents were led in protest by ANC councillor Andile. Infrastructure. A structure of care that makes habitable life is where indifference on the part of those who are meant to provide it lies. For those who need it, infrastructure is but one instance in a structure of abandonment, a point of entry into a larger set of demands, each uttered in a broken tongue, unable to afford the beauty of the prophetic tradition. 4. Thus it was I wished Songa's head in the blocked toilet of waste thoughts when he said, emotion is completely Negro as reason is Greek, and lifted Soyinka on my scrawny shoulders when he butt-plugged him. On the 12th of June 2012, South African poet Lesego Ramphulekeng delivered the public lecture at the Faculty of Humanities at Rhodes University. That institution, that he says, is named after Cecil John, I prefer land to niggers Rhodes. The talk, entitled Writing the Governable, was not a poem, but a meditation on his conditions of emergence as a worker of with the word, the factors social, economic, political, etc., that had brought me here, he says. Central to that, of course, was the artistic food, poisoned and otherwise, I fed off as I set out, and that came out as that bit of writing. Ramphulekeng's itinerary is getting here is a high-low assemblage of thought that is decidedly white and anti-black, for as he says, the English literally canonized racism, as well as globally black, alongside Anthony B., Grada Colomba, Mpere Mkoba, and Richard Pryor, we find Fanon, Césaire, and Biko. What to make of our constant turning back, a repetition compulsion for thinking through the decolonial, post-colonial, anti-colonial, a failure to thrive, even if we are unflinchingly anti-colonial, perhaps we are not yet decolonized. A sign of the time, or a sign of failed revolutionary politics, or blockage. C.L.R. James cited Karl Marx in Black Jacobins. Revolution, says Karl Marx, is the locomotive of history, and of history, Biko said, a people without history is like a vehicle without an engine. Earlier, Fanon said something not much different, that colonialism made people forget that they had a history. Even if nation is a concept born out of violence, what of the urge to take on what Ramphulekeng says is an emissarian return to our native land running, because we're suffering both at home and away. Never being on the right side of the Atlantic is an unsettling feeling, the feeling of a thing that unsettles with others, and that's Moten and Hani. How do we settle with this blockage? Is this what it means to write from the position of the managed, to perpetually incur the risk of co-optation, the attachment from one's conditions of emergence, of becoming the foundation for the objective, positive, exact idea of the proletariat, which is how Sartre describes, that's what he says in the introduction of The Wretched of the Earth, which is to say a sequence of assimilation, displacement, and effacement. And last, my governing ideal. No need to search for me. I'm right there, in the words I write. Get off that tour bus to Soweto, sitting up there like it is zoo time. Let me take you on a walk through hell. Give me a pen and you can be sure it won't be a one-armed struggle. My ambition is to be reactionary, just as defined by the current atmosphere. Or should that be counter-revolutionary, dirty or otherwise? Don't like my asbestos crack-busted lung wave? Safari suit and straitjacket yourself. You don't get it, well, maybe it was never there to be got. Done.